Today was episode 1 in the many-part series, GOP in Opposition, Sotomayor Edition. And the Republicans in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, John Cornyn, Orrin Hatch, and others, who actually have to get elected again at some point, they today talked rather soberly about the responsible use of the advice and consent process and about the fair and thorough confirmation hearings to come. Such restraint. But there are others engaged in this fight who are taking another tack entirely. Can we actually, can we turn off the lights for a second? Can we do the scary lighting thing? Can we do that? Okay, ready? Judge Sotomayor is a liberal judicial activist of the first order who thinks her own personal political agenda is more important than the law as written. She is a radical pick that divides America. She believes the role of the court is to set policy, which is exactly the philosophy that led to the Supreme Court turning into the National Abortion Control Board. President Obama abided by his dismal and lawless empathy standard. This is someone who clearly was picked because she's a woman and Hispanic, not because she was the best qualified. Okay, I'm actually sort of freaking myself out. Can we turn the lights back on? Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. Now I'm going to have nightmares about myself. Those were all statements made today by conservative groups, not senators, but conservative groups opposing the nomination of Judge Sotomayor. Historically, for the 9 current justices, it's taken an average of about 73 days to get confirmed. That means it will probably be less than 73 days before we see the first anti-Sonia Sotomayor ad featuring this soundtrack. Be afraid! Sonia Sotomayor is not objectively particularly liberal. Her academic bona fides, Phi Beta Kappa, Princeton summa cum laude, Yale Law Review, these are not the kinds of things that are handed out to fill non-existent quotas. Seriously. So what explains these overly excited, gun-jumping scare tactics from conservative activists about her? It may be the fact that a fight over an Obama Supreme Court nominee, frankly, any Obama Supreme Court nominee, is considered to be fundraising nirvana for part of the conservative Washington establishment that feeds off of stuff like this. Don't take it from me, they are not exactly hiding it. The day after the news broke about Justice Souter's retirement, conservative fundraiser Dan Morgan told CQ Politics this, quote, "This is a nuclear weapon for the conservatives out there. When you do fundraising, there's an emotional component in this, and boy, the emotion is there magnified times 100. The Supreme Court is great. That's going to be mail, that's going to be phone calls. The clients I work with are in meetings already. There are letters being written already." That was the day after Souter announced his retirement. Joining us now is Senator Byron Dorgan, Democrat of North Dakota. He has a new book out which is called Reckless: How Debt, Deregulation, and Dark Money Nearly Bankrupted America and How We Can Fix It. Senator Dorgan, it's so nice to see you. Thank you for coming and being on the show.
Good to be here. Thank you.
And thank you for enduring the whole flashlight thing.
Oh, it was fun to see from the side, the profile and the lights.
Yeah, terrifying. I'm sorry. I have to ask you first if you think that the Senate is likely to confirm Judge Sotomayor for the Supreme Court. You think so? I
think so. She's well qualified. She has a very distinguished record. She was appointed by the first President George Bush, nominated, I should say. She's been nominated twice, confirmed twice by the U.S. Senate. Unless there's something that we don't understand, something that's extraordinary, I don't think there's much question but that she'll be confirmed.
Is the effort by conservative interest groups to try to make as much hay as possible out of this nomination, not necessarily to stop her, but I think in order to raise their own profile, to raise money, do you think that's a symptom of the larger problem of special interest, the sort of special interest money machine in Washington?
Well, I mean, part of this is stirring the pot, which is always the case. Stir the pot and get the other side exercised, raise some funds, have a big fight. I mean, that's part of what, there's a whole industry that's geared up to do that. And part of that is fundraising. And so it's not unexpected. I kind of, you think over these years we've developed now a mindset about the Supreme Court being us versus them, whoever us and whoever them are. That's not the way the Supreme Court ought to be, but it is.
And it's not the way that it always was either, not even in recent political history.
That's right. But, especially with modern politics, fundraising, talk radio, all of the interest groups, I mean, this really has divided the country in a lot of ways. And on all these big issues now, each side decides to stir it up, and there's nobody better than the far right, of course.
Well, let me ask you about the relationship between that us versus them dynamic, that sort of blue versus red dynamic in Washington, and some of what you write about in Reckless. You write about how deregulation in both the Clinton and the Bush administrations was a major cause for the current economic crisis. It's something that was not seen as a red versus blue political issue. Do you think that the current president can and should lead the charge on explaining regulation, really making the case for it in terms of rebuilding the financial sector?
Yeah, well, it's not a question of can, he must. We will not fix what's wrong in this country unless we solve that question. And, you know, the action taken in 1999, Financial Services Modernization Act, got rid of the Glass-Steagall, all the things that were done to try to separate banking from other risk enterprises. When that was done, it was supported by the Clinton administration. Graham Leach Bliley is actually what did it, 3 Republican legislators, but it was bipartisan. Only 8 of us in the Senate voted no. And if we don't now decide that we're going to get rid of this too big to fail, begin to take apart at least some of the biggest institutions that steered the country into the ditch, begin regulating things like derivatives and hedge funds, and if we don't do that, we can't fix what's wrong, and we're destined to repeat this again.
You don't come from a financial services background, but when that was being voted on in 1999, your floor speeches in opposition to that legislation were eerily prescient about what was going to happen. What sort of values and experience did you depend on to give yourself the foresight, not only to vote against it, but to really predict what it would cause?
Well, it wasn't that I was clairvoyant or smart. I think just common sense. I mean, I come from a town of 300 people, high school senior class of 9 students. So I feel it a great privilege to serve in the Senate. But on issues like this, it seems to me when you take a look at the very large banking institutions and what they wanted to do back in 1999 under what was called modernization, it occurred to me that it was just nuts. I mean, it was going to create great peril for this country. One of the things I said during my floor speech, or a couple of floor speeches, I said if the banks want to gamble, they really ought to go to Las Vegas. But they ought not be gambling with the FDIC-insured funds from the American taxpayer.
The Republicans were united against the president's stimulus package, against the president's budget. In terms of the overall argument about the economy and about taking care of American families, pocketbook issues, do you think one party is winning over the other? Do you think the Democrats are winning? Do you think the Republicans are winning?
Well, I think both parties have a lot to answer for, but the fact is, in the last 8 years under George W. Bush, in addition to the Financial Modernization Act, which both parties supported, only 8 of us voted no, but George W. Bush came to town, and he hired a bunch of people who said, you know what, regulation is a 4-letter word. We don't intend to regulate anything. We're going to spend years being willfully blind. And then we had old Alan Greenspan sitting there in the concrete Federal Reserve Board saying, I don't intend to do anything either because I love self-regulation. I mean, it really ran this country into the ditch. Now our job is to try to pull it up and pull it out. We've got a lot of people in deep trouble, who've lost their jobs, losing their homes. You know, we've got a lot to fix in this country. But you won't do it by ignoring the cause of the problem. There's this old saying, if you don't care where you are, you're never going to be lost. We need to figure out exactly what has caused this and fix it so that it doesn't happen again. And that's going to require this administration and this Congress to make tough decisions about things like too big to fail, what kind of regulation is necessary, how do we regulate derivatives, hedge funds, and all of those important issues.
It seems to me like even if you say that both parties are to blame for what has happened, whichever party is going to be the solution here is going to reap the political benefit.
It's our responsibility to solve this problem, absolutely.
Senator Byron Dorgan of North Dakota, the new book is called Reckless, How Debt, Deregulation, and Dark Money Nearly Bankrupted America and How We Can Fix It. It's a real pleasure to have you here on the show. Thanks, sir. Nice to see you.